people as they were sentenced to prison for marijuana offenses, nonviolent marijuana offenses. I had 3 clients get sentenced to 18 months in prison. One that struck me the hardest was a young man who consented to a search of his car that he had no need to consent to that search, and he ended up getting sentenced to 18 months in prison. The case went on for about a year, and in the courtroom, his mom and his girlfriend, who I got to know, were crying in the courtroom when he sentenced to prison. And I got home to my wife and I told her that I was going to drink until I forgot that prison existed. And the next morning, I have client interviews. I am not giving my clients for the next morning the utmost attention that they deserved. Because I was up drinking, depressed the night before. And then it struck me that I needed to change the law so I was no longer standing next to nonviolent drug offenders when they were sentenced to prison instead of trying to defend them. And so I dedicated my life to ending drug penalties, which led me to being a chief petitioner for Measure 91 in 2014, which led me to this measure, which came about from 50 or so Oregon stakeholders that work in criminal justice reform, that work in drug treatment, work in recovery, and put together a measure to move Oregon away from criminal punishment-based approach to treating drugs and drug addiction towards a health-based approach. So I'm going to share my screen, run through some facts about Measure 110, and then I'll happy to open up and take questions from anyone. All right, why does Oregon need to pass Measure 110? We need adequate access to treatment. Oregon ranks nearly last of all states in availability of drug treatment for those who want it. We have 1 in 11 Oregonians who've been addicted to drugs, and that is increasing. We have 1 to 2 Oregonians dying every day from a drug overdose, and we have high barriers to entry to treatment, long wait list times, weeks, if not months, to get into a treatment facility. To entry to treatment, Oregon overdose deaths are increasing, impacting areas all over our great state. What does Measure 110 do? At its core, it moves Oregon's approach to treating addiction from a criminal punishment approach to a health-based approach. We reduce criminal penalties for simple personal possession of a small amount of drugs we're currently treated as misdemeanors down to civil infractions. We're going to increase the availability of drug treatment and recovery programs. We're going to fund all of this through existing marijuana taxes and law enforcement savings. I would think what is interesting to your society, we changed the personal possession of all Schedule 1 to Schedule 4 drugs from a misdemeanor to a civil infraction. That includes LSD, psilocybin, other Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4 drugs. Those current penalties for these amounts are a 364-day jail sentence and a $6,250 fine. Under Measure 110, we'll move that down to civil infraction, and we'll no longer have the collateral consequences of the criminal record that follows you potentially for the rest of your life. Measure 110 does not legalize any drugs, and it does not change the criminal code for selling, driving under the influence, and other crimes associated. Only applies to possession offenses. Measure 110, based on which numbers and projections, is going to allocate between $103 to $157 million a year for drug treatment and recovery programs, between $91 to $98 million from excess marijuana tax revenue, and between $12 million to $48 million in law enforcement savings. This is about 4 times as much as what Oregon currently spends on drug treatment and recovery. Oregon still unnecessarily arrests nearly 9,000 Oregonians every year for just personal possession. Black and Indigenous Oregonians are 3 times more likely to be arrested. Criminalizing drugs also disproportionately harms people of color in general, poor people, immigrants, and the LGBTQ community, and suspicion of drugs is often used as an excuse to over-police communities of color. Measure 110 will nearly eliminate racial disparities in drug arrests and convictions. This is from the Criminal Justice Commission, which conducted the first ever racial and ethnic impact statement for a ballot measure. And this is in the voters pamphlet that's mailed to everyone, and you can also read it online. Racial disparities in drug arrests will fall by 95%. Native American and Black communities are hit the hardest by these drug convictions, so they will actually be helped the most. For Measure 110 will decrease their convictions by 94.2%. Along with convictions and arrests, the Criminal Justice Commission noted will have fewer collateral consequences of these convictions, which includes the loss of an education, housing, and employment opportunities. We've got 125 organizations and more who support this measure, from the American College of Physicians to the Oregon Nurses Association, and kind of the list kind of goes on and on. Coalition for Communities of Color, got labor union support, Democratic Party of Oregon. We are a bipartisan coalition, but the Democratic Party of Oregon has endorsed, as well as the Multnomah County Democrats, as well as the Washington County and Benton County and Marion County Democrats. And personally, for me, not speaking on behalf of the campaign, my favorite endorsement is Our Revolution, which has endorsed this measure. Our Revolution came out of the Bernie Sanders Political Action Committee, and he's the one that started Our Revolution. Personal hero of mine. Normally I would play a campaign video, but we're going to keep this educational, so I will bypass that. Our list of supporters really goes on and on. I encourage everybody, go to voteyeson110.org, learn about the measure. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have at this time. I really appreciate your time.
I just want to say, I don't even know you, Anthony, but I just feel so proud of you. What a huge, huge amount of work you have done to get this to where it is, and what a tremendous difference it's going to make in the lives of so many people. Good for you. Way to go. Proud of you.
Thank you very much, Peggy. I appreciate that. And I want to say, I definitely appreciate people that support the work. People that don't support the work, I definitely hear from them. And I must say that I am honored and humbled to be able to work every day to end the harms of the drug war. It's rewarding work, and it's a lot of pressure, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, I might ask a question on that. Are you finding any, opposition to this? And if so, where's that typically coming from?
Yeah, so we have basically two camps of opposition for the most part, of like major opponents. And they all are funded by or generate revenue by or for some reason support the current system. And that includes law enforcement. The district attorneys, I think 26 of the 36 district attorneys oppose our measure. The Sheriff's Association opposed the measure. Some drug treatment providers, which get referrals from the criminal justice system. The No campaign has been primarily funded by a criminal defense attorney who has made a living defending people who've been harmed by the drug war. And so those are the major opposition that we face. And we have, they basically break down into two camps. The law enforcement camp, they support the current system. They think arresting and jailing people is an effective deterrent and is an effective policy. And then some people that work in drug treatment and recovery, they state that they support, the criminal justice and racial justice issues, but they have concerns about the process. They have legislation that they have worked on that they would prefer. They would prefer an alcohol tax in the future. They have worked on other legislation that they hope to pass in the near future. To that, to law enforcement, we just definitely disagree on arresting and jailing people for personal drug possession. As far as waiting to pass something in the future, I feel, and the campaign feels, that Oregon can't afford to wait to maybe pass something in the future. We have people getting arrested every day. We have people dying every day. We have people waiting to get treatment, and we need to take this opportunity while we can. And then we can improve the law in the future, in future legislative sessions. But let's pass this measure while we can.
I have a question about, well, first of all, I want to say thank you. This is beautiful harm reduction. It's a lovely measure for that. And I wonder, speaking of that, I wonder about, my question is about the facilities that would offer treatment, because access to these facilities, oftentimes folks of color don't have access. And then even when they do have access, still experience racial disparities because of the care they're provided. So I was wondering specifically which facilities, if you have facilities in mind already, and if those facilities, if the individuals working there are trained in like trauma-based information to help, and specifically the types of traumas that just our culture traumatizes people, and particularly people of color. And I wonder if any thought has gone into the specific facilities themselves and what's going to be going on with those.
Definitely a very good question. So what Measure 110 does is basically move Oregon towards what Portugal has done. Portugal in 2001 brought together addiction experts and medical experts, to move away from a criminal-based approach to a health-based approach. And Measure 110 creates an oversight and accountability council that is comprised of an addiction medicine doctor, social workers, treatment providers, harm reduction providers, people who have experience working with the houseless population and their drug addiction issues, recovery mentors, people in recovery themselves. And we mandate that there's at least 3 people on this committee that come from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by our drug laws. And this council will then disperse funds, this $100 million plus, to drug treatment and recovery organizations all over the state of Oregon. And folks can read the measure, and you can start off by going to voteyeson110.org. But then, Secretary of State's website, in the voters pamphlet, right there on page 3, it shows how we're going to, what gets funded. And what gets funded, first of all, is low barrier substance use disorder treatment that is evidence informed, trauma informed, culturally responsive, patient centered, and non-judgmental, as well as peer support and recovery services, transitional supportive and permanent housing, and harm reduction interventions. Now, it's going to be up to advocates, voters, legislators, policymakers to ensure that these funds are going to quality organizations that aren't discriminatory and are doing good work. And how Measure 110 improves upon our current system is that right now, from, for instance, the marijuana tax revenue, 20% of the marijuana tax revenue currently goes to the Oregon Health Authority and then flows to substance treatment programs and recovery programs. And right now, I don't know who gets that money, and there's not much oversight or accountability. But with this Oversight and Accountability Council, there will be an audit every 2 years by the Secretary of State, and there will be a public report that we'll all be able to see. So we'll get to see exactly where the money is going and if this program is successful, and we'll have an opportunity to adapt. And so we do put in accountability, transparency, and put in parameters to ensure we're going to good actors, but it is going to be up to us to monitor to monitor the situation, ensure it's going to good sources and the money is being utilized effectively, and then up to us to make changes as needed. But I would say that by adding accountability, by adding audits, by adding a public report, we're improving upon the current system. Thank you.
Can I ask how this may have any impact on anybody doing time right now for arrests for the same?
Mm-hmm. So the measure itself is not retroactive. However, it will set in motion legislation and create momentum for legislation to help people that are incarcerated and also help expunge old offenses. When we passed cannabis legalization in 2014, that cannabis legalization law also did not include expungement and also did not look back at old offenses. But post the victory, we managed to pass legislation that allowed for expungement of past offenses and decreased marijuana penalties even further. Now, it turns out that in Oregon, there aren't many people remaining in prison solely for marijuana. But if there's anybody in prison for the types of offenses that Measure 110 reduces penalties for, we'll definitely be working on legislation to change that and pass expungement provisions. We definitely want to help get people out of prison, if there are any, from these that suffer from these possession penalties that we're reducing.
Thank you so much, and thanks for tackling this. I can't disagree with anything about this. I really love it. I think of all the measures on the ballot right now that concern this issue, this is by far the one that I hope gets passed. Thank you again.
Thank you. And I know I can share that we take no vote for granted. We fight for votes all over the state. We not only want to win, we'll take a win. We want to win as big as possible so that we do have a mandate with the legislature to further improve expungement provisions. And I can say that our polling shows that this measure polls better than marijuana legalization ever did. And we're very much a lot of the same campaign team and pollsters that ran that campaign. And so prospects of victory are very good, but we're definitely not taking anything for granted. Our campaign, we run as if we are, everybody needs to find 10 votes to win this thing, and and it's that close. And so we fight to get every vote. But prospects are really good. But I encourage everybody to help spread the word. And I'll put in the chat like how to volunteer. We're starting texting voters. That's really a good way if you support this measure. Texting is a kind of a fun, easy way to reach out to people in Oregon. I'll put that in the chat if people want to sign up to help pass this measure this year.
I was surprised when I saw the presentation that the current Oregon penalties for possession are as light as they are, especially with Schedule 1 drugs like LSD. I think it's at a maximum of 365 days in prison, was it? And a $6,000 fine. And it was a misdemeanor, because I was under the impression, I think under federal law, possession is a felony, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. And in Oregon, I'm sorry to cut you off, but in Oregon, prior to 2017, possession of any amount of any drug other than marijuana was a felony, which actually shocked me to learn that. So 1 gram of psilocybin mushrooms prior to 2017 was a felony. But in 2017, the legislature moved the lowest possession offenses from a felony down to a misdemeanor.
The only concern I have here is that if someone is busted for marijuana, well, not marijuana, but say psilocybin, are they automatically forced into a treatment program? I mean, I'm trying to envision a situation where someone might prefer the current penalties to being forced into a treatment program that they don't relate to.
Yeah. So under Measure 110, we do not force anybody into treatment. There is no coercive treatment for the civil infraction. So people will have a choice. So let's say you're caught with 7 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. You will be issued a citation, $100 ticket. And if you want, you can just pay that ticket. Or you can undergo a health assessment at a drug treatment center, not undergo treatment, just do a health assessment. And if you undergo the health assessment, then that fine gets waived. Now, for other drugs other than psilocybin, our hope is that there will be some people who are caught with other drugs. They'll undergo a health assessment, and they may realize that they have an addiction issue, and they'll seek treatment, and the treatment will be free. If you don't have insurance and you can't reimburse, the treatment will be free, and it'll be free to people who aren't convicted as well. So if you have an alcohol problem or you just want to seek treatment and normally can't pay for it, drug treatment facilities that get funding through Measure 110 will be able to seek treatment whether you've been convicted of the civil infraction or not. So yeah, under Measure 110, there is not coercive treatment for the low-level possession offenses.
Got it. Thank you.
I had a question about where you, and forgive me if you already spoke on this, but where you draw the line on possession and potential trafficking. What's the quantities? Are you guys addressing that level?
Yeah. So what Measure 110 does is take everything that is a current misdemeanor and move that down to a civil infraction. And so that varies by drug. So Measure 110 did not change the misdemeanor levels. And so that varies by each drug. And then what was the felony possession level that does not amount to a commercial offense, that will move from a felony down to a misdemeanor. It'll still remain a criminal offense, but it'll be a misdemeanor offense instead of a criminal offense. And that varies. And what is considered a commercial offense varies by drugs as well. I believe it's 60 grams of psilocybin mushrooms and like 200 user amounts of LSD, but it differs. So we don't change the existing law amounts. We just reduce this. But I do think with an oversight and accountability council and advocates going to the legislature, I think we'll be able to, further improve the law and kind of look at the limits that are, I don't know why the legislature settled on 12 grams for psilocybin mushrooms, for instance. And so, that could be changed in the future, things like that. Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure. So that was the existing law, and so the amounts, we downgrade the amounts from that are possession offenses, from a felony to a misdemeanor down to a civil infraction. Yeah, but the amounts that were there, that was from original law, and you can definitely see biases from who wrote the law and what's considered a misdemeanor for Oxycontin versus cocaine versus psilocybin. But yeah, that was written previously, and you can definitely see some like drug war biases that were written there. And my hope personally, not speaking on behalf of the campaign, but my hope personally as a longtime drug policy reformer is that this measure will create the momentum to further examine those laws and put them more in line with the harm that the drugs do and the overdose level. And I think we'll definitely examine that in the future and continue to improve the law on those possession limits when it comes to psychedelics, particularly psilocybin, and then as well as expungement law. So there's more work to be done. And but this is, I think, any way you slice it, for the psychedelic movement, for the drug policy reform movement, for the treatment and recovery movement, for people that are concerned about the Black Lives Matter movement. I think any way you slice it, this is a step in the right direction, but definitely more work to be done after we get this victory. Mm-hmm. Mhm. Mhm. No, and yeah, and I understand that, and I think the wet versus dry is something that um, the cannabis community definitely had to deal with, and a big part of changing the law around that is educating legislators and decriminalizing personal use will go a long way towards helping educate legislators. If you look at people in politics, they tend to be older and they tend to be more conservative. Even the quote unquote liberals or progressives in the legislature tend to be conservative in their actions. They don't want to do anything, usually, they don't want to do anything too controversial because that's how you lose an election. When you're an incumbent, if you don't rock the boat too much, your odds of being reelected are pretty strong. So when prior to 2017, if you were going to try to change the law around psilocybin and you're changing the law around what's considered a felony, that's a tougher climb than changing the law around what's considered a misdemeanor. And then if we pass Measure 110, now you're changing the law around been a civil infraction. And we are, even though it doesn't decriminalize larger amounts, we will reduce larger amounts down from a felony down to a misdemeanor. And that will continue this education. But that wet versus dry is definitely something that impacted cannabis growers and medical cannabis growers, where police and prosecutors in certain counties would weigh plants wet, would weigh the root ball and like the soil that would come up in the root ball to get people outside of the protected limits. But then over time, because we changed the law and we took the effort to educate legislators, the law got changed to where the weight only applied to dried usable marijuana. And we'll need to continue that education effort around psilocybin and other substances at the legislature after this election cycle. But I think winning with 110 is a great step in the right direction. Yeah, so the director of the Oregon Health Authority will appoint that measure. Will appoint the people on the council, and so we're definitely going. We're not going to have a say in that. We're definitely going to utilize our influence to do the best that we can. But I think that the plant medicine and people familiar with that, it's only going to increase. The pool of people is only going to increase. But I think that's something that is going to be imperative around your organization and others to be really active around that. And, the 109 campaign has Senator Elizabeth Steiner Hayward as a spokesperson and supporter. Our measure has several members of the legislature who've endorsed this measure as well. And so, advocating for people who know these substances the best is definitely something we're going to work towards. And if necessary, if we see that quality people who don't know these issues better are getting put on this council, we'll definitely look to pass legislation to ensure that people who know these issues the best get put on the council. So yeah, we're all going to need to be vigilant at the legislature over time and pay attention to who's on this council and to ensure that we're moving forward. But I think this election is going to put us in a much better place than we have been. Correct. So the peyote language is from existing law. I know Oregon has had a court case around that, and I think the legislature adapted to the court case. And so, that's all from existing law. We did not change that. And I think, I think the religious use of psilocybin or other issues is something that advocates will need to take up with the legislature. But so we did not change the definition of any drug laws or change the amounts of any drug laws. We did not change that at all with this measure. We just merely brought the penalties down. So if somebody was using peyote and they did not have a religious exemption, without measure 110, that the personal use would be a misdemeanor, but under measure 110, it would be a civil infraction. But the religious exemption has been the law of the land. We don't impact that, and that law will remain.
And I guess I have a follow-up question to that, because I've heard that a couple times, and it made sense to me to not change, kind of take existing law and fold it in there, and that way it's doesn't do as much. But then it's like, well, wouldn't you want to try to do more? Maybe you could speak a little bit to why that's the choice that gets made. Is that just because there's only so many hours in the day, or is it strategic? Because I would probably vote for this, whatever it said. Like with marijuana, I think way back, I don't even know if I lived here then, way long ago, maybe in the 70s or 80s, there was just a legalize it completely, and it got like 30% of the vote, which is disappointing in a way, but it shows that there are 30% of the people who would just say, Wild Wild West, we don't need anything, we'll just open it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when you work on a ballot measure, it's like a 2-year process of writing this measure and bringing people together. And so when you have various people from various communities, there are compromises that are made, and anything you change is more you have to explain to voters. And so, when I work on a measure, this is the third measure I've been on, the chief petitioner of a statewide measure. Medical marijuana dispensaries back in 2010, legalization of cannabis in 2014, and now this measure. And each time we've really tried to pass the most progressive measure that would that had a great chance of victory. And when you start drafting it 2 years out, you don't know what the political climate is going to be like 2 years later. And so you just kind of do your best to write a measure that is going to do good work and has a great chance of passing. And if it does pass, it has a big enough mandate that the legislature won't undo it, or there won't be an uproar by other, opponents to put something on the ballot to repeal what you did. So, when we wrote this measure, we didn't know that there was going to be a coronavirus pandemic. We didn't know the Black Lives Matter movement was going to take off. And so, and you never know, I said we didn't know that there was going to be a medical psilocybin measure on the ballot either. And so you just kind of do the best that you can with the knowledge that you have. But yeah, I always try to pass the most progressive measure possible. But yeah, anytime you change anything, that's more you have to explain to voters. And it's much harder running a yes campaign than it is running a no campaign, because the voters aren't sure about a measure or they don't understand something. If they're undecided at all, the kind of default is to say no. And so if we were put in a position to have to explain the religious use of psilocybin or any other substances. That's just one more thing that we have to explain to voters. It just would make it harder to pass. And, 2 years ago, I would imagine that would have polled differently than what it would, this November 3rd. And so some of these things we just kind of leave to future sessions, but we want to do the best that we can with our knowledge at the time.
Thanks for that explanation.
So I just want to jump in and say that I really appreciate that you are taking that stance, because I have talked to several people who are kind of vehemently opposed to Measure 109 because it's not progressive enough to them. And, I have the same mindset that you do, that let's get a foot in the door, and then you're going to set a precedent and you can change things over time, but it's better than not having anything. So thank you. I appreciate that. To me, that's just a really mature approach to it. Compromise is a good thing, and progress sometimes takes time.
Yes, and getting on the ballot and raising the money to run an effective yes campaign is a lot of work. And you never know if you're going to get another chance at it. I think the first time marijuana legalization got put on the ballot in Oregon was in the early 80s. And then it didn't get put back on the ballot again until 2012. And then fortunately, even though it failed in 2012, we managed to get it back on the ballot in 2014. But if we would have lost in 2014, there's no guarantee we would have got back on the ballot in 2016 or 2020. And so, yeah, if the psilocybin measure doesn't pass this year, there's no guarantee that in 2022 or 2024 anything better is going to make the ballot. You never know how things are going to shake out. And so I respect people's political opinions. For me personally, I look at, basically there are two things on the ballot. There's the current law and then the measure you're voting on. And if the measure that you're voting on is an improvement over the status quo, I urge people to vote for the improvement and then fight to further improve upon that improvement. That's just my personal opinion. And I think amongst activists, to me, it's, when these issues really well around psychedelics, around cannabis, whatever it is, you understand it's nonsensical for these drugs to be criminalized. And the drug war is nonsensical. And you can't believe that we've been fighting this drug war for decades. But change is difficult. I've been at this fight for 2 decades now. And I think as advocates, it's really important to take the time and appreciate small victories, no matter how small they are, when you move things forward, and then celebrate those victories and take them, and then know that there's more work to be done.
I'd like to also really thank you for the work you've done. This is as exciting a piece of legislation as I've seen in my lifetime. The idea that we will make significant steps towards ending the drug war is really pretty extraordinary. It's been 50 years that we've been wasting our people's lives and money and everything else on this disastrous approach. Also, I used to work in a place where addicts would show up regularly, and sometimes we could find, asking for treatment, and we could sometimes find them treatment, but more often than not, we couldn't. And it was a terrible, terrible thing. Along that line, part of the money is going to come from the savings we have in not incarcerating people, as I understand it. I'm just wondering what the mechanism is to get the money out of the hands of the sheriffs. I don't think they're going to want to get rid of it just because they're short funded as well. But also they may not approve of it. Do you have some mechanism in mind to get it away from them?
Yeah. So there are 2 mechanisms. One is the fact that Measure 110 takes everything above 45 million that the marijuana tax revenue brings in,
right,
and allocates that to treatment and recovery. So currently, 35% of the revenue ultimately goes to law enforcement, 15% to the state police, and 10% has been earmarked both to cities and counties for local law enforcement. So under Measure 110, because they're not going to arrest 8,000 plus people a year for these minor possession charges, they no longer need as much money. And so they're going to lose everything above 45 million. So 35% of everything above 45 million, the state's expecting to bring in 130 million this year. So everything above 45 million, they're going to lose that. That goes to law enforcement. And then we task the state, and I imagine the state's going to utilize the Criminal Justice Commission. The state is tasked with examining and doing a study on how much is saved from not arresting and jailing these nearly 9,000 Oregonians every year for these minor drug possession offenses. The state financial estimate committee, in their report that's in everybody's voters pamphlet statement, and that committee is comprised of the state treasurer and other government officials. They project it's going to be $12 million a year that will be saved, and they expect that to go up after the next couple of years. Our campaign tasked Eco Northwest, which is to do an independent study. They're an economic firm that are well respected. We use them for Measure 91, and they are actually much closer to what Measure 91 was going to bring in for marijuana legalization than what the state projected. But Eco Northwest projects it's going to be between 25 to $48 million we're going to save, because they calculate that for every misdemeanor possession arrest, and there are nearly 9,000 of them, the state on average spends about $30,000 to fund that versus $10,000 to provide people on average the treatment that they need. So by their numbers, we're going to save a lot more, but the state's going to be tasked with doing a study on that. And we're definitely going to be paying attention to that and ensuring that the savings from law enforcement do indeed go to treatment and recovery and social services instead of law enforcement. But that's definitely something we're going to need to be vigilant about, because you're correct. The people, law enforcement and everyone else that's getting the money now, they're not going to want to let that go. But when you're arresting 8,000 plus fewer people and convicting 4,000 fewer people for these minor drug offenses, there's no reason they need all that money. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say our opposition is trying to say that Measure 110 is eliminating pathways to treatment through the court system. And that is simply not true, because the 4,000 people that are convicted of these misdemeanor convictions, they're not given treatment. They're given a criminal conviction, and that's it. The people that get treatment are the people that get felonies. The people that go to prison, they may get treatment. Now, it's not great treatment, and going to prison or jail actually dramatically increases the chances you're going to die of an overdose when you get out of prison. And studies have shown that voluntary treatment is a much preferred method than coercive treatment. But the people that get ordered to go to treatment because they commit felonies, because they're driving under the influence, because they're ordered to it through drug courts, that's still going to remain. But it's not true that these misdemeanor offenses are leading to treatment. All these misdemeanor offenses are giving people a criminal record and feeding the prison industrial complex. The only reason they would give anybody treatment is if they're violating parole, or because they got this conviction, now they can't get a job. Now you force people to sell drugs to feed themselves because you've taken away their employment and educational opportunities, and then they commit greater crimes. But people are not getting treatment from these low-level misdemeanor offenses. So Measure 110 is not taking those away. Now, what Measure 110 will do is provide an avenue for people that find out that they have a problem or think that they have a problem, to be able to get treatment that they normally wouldn't be able to afford, to get treatment before their addiction actually spirals out of control and they start committing greater crimes to feed their habit or because they're driving under the influence later on in their addiction. Yeah, so under Measure 110, every drug treatment recovery service that takes this funding, which is going to be, currently Oregon spends it's about $25 million on treatment and recovery on state dollars, and we're going to bump that up to more than $100 million. Everybody taking those funds must provide free treatment to Oregonians that can't afford it. Now, if you have insurance that covers it, they can bill the insurance. But if you can't afford it, it must be free. And so this will provide free treatment and recovery services to anybody, not just people that are convicted of a crime.
I've read through some of the arguments in opposition posted on the voter's guide, and one common concern that seems to come up a lot, and I remember that this was especially emphasized in the sheriffs of Multnomah County argument was that reducing the felony charge to a misdemeanor for larger amounts, and subsequently reducing misdemeanor to a civil infraction, that this would not only increase accessibility to possibly adulterated and dangerous drugs to people who just to users, casual users, but would also remove some of this disincentive for dealers, for people who are pushing larger amounts, because they won't face the possibility of a felony charge. Do you think that this will be the case should 110 pass?
I don't. We don't change the law for people that are selling. So those felony offenses are going to remain. And if you look at Portugal and Switzerland and other countries that have implemented similar policies, drug use has not skyrocketed amongst juveniles or adults. And you see overdose rates, HIV infections, hepatitis infections, really all across the board. You see greater harm reduction over time by providing social services instead of jail and prison sentences. I think on this realm, this is just where we fundamentally disagree with that opposition. They think arresting and jailing people is the way to go. And I think that's our current system. And so if you think that the current system is working, if you think the status quo is fine, then you're not going to support Measure 110. But if you think we can do better, that we can do a better job of saving lives, we can do a better job of providing treatment, we can do a better job of job training and providing transitional housing with $100 million or more, then Measure 110 is the policy to support. Now, I think we have seen even a sea change amongst our population and amongst law enforcement, actually. And see, in 2014, so 6 years ago, 35 out of the 36 district attorneys opposed marijuana legalization, using a lot of the same arguments they're using about Measure 110. That if we legalize marijuana, the sky is going to fall. Kids are going to be using on the playground and in the school bathrooms, and it's going to be like chaos. And we've seen that has not been the case. They've utilized the same arguments that have really been the fearmonger arguments since the drug war started, and those haven't panned out on marijuana. The evidence that we've seen from Portugal and other places, it's not going to play out like that. And so with reducing these criminal penalties, providing people the treatment they need, we just fundamentally disagree. If you think that people need to go to prison, we more think we should invest in people and not more prisons. And now, we had 35 out of 36 district attorneys opposing marijuana legalization in 2014. Now we have it's just 26 out of the 36 district attorneys that oppose us. And we've had 3 endorse us. Multnomah County's district attorney, Mike Schmidt, got his sign right behind me. Mike Schmidt has endorsed. John Hummel, who's the Deschutes County district attorney, he's endorsed. And Matt Ellis, the Wasco County district attorney, have all endorsed the measure. So to have prosecutors go against their more conservative counterparts, I think shows that being smart on this issue is the way forward. And we've seen that with cannabis legalization. We've seen that in Portugal and Switzerland, and that's the better way to go. And these fear mongering arguments that that drug use is going to skyrocket and that dealers are going to use this to hide their dealing isn't going to plan out, because dealing is still going to be illegal.
Right. It seems that a lot of the evidence that we have so far would point towards exactly the conclusions you're drawing here. Another concern that seems to pop up a lot is that, this initiative is being led by, a non-local organization, the DPA, a New York-based, organization, and that, there could be some sort of removal from, what's actually going on in Portland, on the ground level. I don't know, would you say that this accountability council is sort of supposed to act as like a counterbalance to the fact that this indeed is being led, from New York rather than Oregon? Or what would you say to that?
Yeah, so this campaign is led by Oregonians. It was written by Oregonians, and Oregonians are going to vote on this measure because it's the best policy for Oregon. Now, the Drug Policy Alliance, we share the goals of the Drug Policy Alliance of moving to a health-based approach around addiction and drug use. But the Drug Policy Alliance does not run this campaign. They financially support this campaign, and we're glad that they and others across the nation support this campaign. But I think our measure has more, and Measure 110 has more local donors than any other measure. The median donation is about $50, and over 80% of the donors are from Oregon. And the people on the council, my co-chief petitioners, the people that wrote the measure, the people that actually run the campaign, are all Oregonians. Now, Drug Policy Alliance provides financial support. Thankful for that. They provided financial support for Measure 91. Their founders helped pass medical marijuana back in 1998. They have a long history in Oregon and in other states, but this is a measure that's run by Oregonians for Oregonians, and Oregonians are going to vote on it because it's the best policy for Oregon. Hey, Jason, I'm sorry, you got real staticky on that.
Terrible sound. I don't know what's going on. That's a bummer. Jason always has awesome things to say. He must have pulled out a cord. And so, yeah, Mercury's, I think, just almost retrograde. It's going to be a rough month until about November 20th. Here he comes.
Can't hear you at all now, Jason.
And now there's no sound.
Feel free to put it in the chat. If it's I hear you. Yep. So Mark Zuckerberg and Chan, his wife, donated to the campaign. That was a surprise to me when I heard that was going to come in. Again, I appreciate their support. I'm glad that Zuckerberg is spending his money on a good cause, in my opinion. But ultimately, he had no say in the measure. And I'm, personally, I'm glad he's putting his resources to good use in this measure, but he had no say in drafting this measure. And when I heard that he was going to donate to the campaign, I was as surprised as anybody. Yeah, again, this measure is for Oregon by Oregonians, but I think that you'll see other states pay attention to this measure, like other states have paid attention to cannabis legalization and medical cannabis. And so after 2 years or 4 years, and other states see that Oregon has benefited by a lower addiction rate, saving tax dollars, fewer overdoses. I think you'll see, similar to cannabis legalization, there's a good chance that Colorado, Washington, California, other states will follow suit. And then hopefully, because of that, we'll see federal officials start introducing legislation to help change our culture nationwide. And I think that's, in addition to the practical aspects of this benefiting Oregon and then eventually the rest of the country, is the cultural change of reducing the stigma around addiction and drug use. When you treat people like criminals, it makes people afraid to come forward to their friends and family to getting help that they need. It makes it harder for people to learn about the medicinal benefits of substances like psychedelics, and we're going to see a cultural change as well as a practical change around making sure that we can treat addiction as a health issue. There's no other health issue where we criminalize people. We don't criminalize people because they're diabetic and need insulin. We shouldn't criminalize people for their drug use and addiction. But yeah, this is for Oregon, and it's the best policy for Oregon. But after it's successful here, I expect other states to move forward as well. If we can see over time a change in the national dialogue like we've seen around cannabis.
How do you think this will affect asset forfeiture abuse?
Well, I think that it will definitely help in that, as we've seen with cannabis legalization, there have been many fewer drug arrests, which of course, drug arrests and convictions are the first step to asset forfeiture. Actually, oftentimes you don't even need a conviction to start to forfeit or to seize somebody's assets. When in 2010, Oregon arrested 30,000 people for drugs. And so after legalizing cannabis, we've got that down to 9,000 people. And this will bring that down by 90%. We'll be down to 1,000. So we have that many fewer people getting arrested. Practically speaking, there's going to be less asset forfeiture abuse because there's going to be less people who've been arrested and been put in encounters where their money and house and car can be seized. But so practically speaking, it will benefit, but there will be more work to be done. So I would say this is, just another step in the right direction around dealing with over-policing, police abuse, and other ills of the war on drugs that has been so harmful to our nation, disproportionately people of color.
Thank you. And I hope you're getting good media coverage because I think you're a wonderful spokesperson and doing great work. Thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think the media has done an okay job on this. You never know it depends on the interviewer. And a lot of times the headlines and the picture try to sensationalize this issue, and they want to show needles and heroin spoons and things like that. And what I just try to get across is, Measure 110, while drugs makes a, clickable headline, it's really about people, and it's about what you want for your loved ones. When we have 10% of Oregonians battling addiction, when you have thousands upon thousands of people that can't get the treatment that they need, and we have thousands of people getting arrested, they're losing their employment. People, I think when you talk about this with your friends and family, anybody's on the fence on this measure, say, what would you want for yourself? What would you want for your loved ones? Do you want a phone call that your loved one's in jail and they've lost their job, they've lost their financial aid, they might lose their housing, and they're not going to get any treatment? Or do you want the phone call from them that, hey, I got a civil infraction, or hey, I think I have an issue in here, I'm thinking about seeking drug treatment in my area? I mean, what do you want for your loved ones? So in the end, it's about people, and I hope that we can convey that, because addiction, drug use it impacts every family, no matter where you live, no matter whether you're rich or poor. And it's really, it's time that we move forward and just treat people with more humanely, with compassion, and treat this as a health issue and a harm reduction issue instead of just investing more and more in the prison industrial complex.
So I was wondering if the measure does anything to help support other sort of progressive harm reductive reforms to drug policies, such as needle exchanges, safe injection sites, access to naloxone and what have you. Is there anything in the measure concerning other such efforts?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. So on page 3, section 2 of the measure, it lists the 4 buckets that will be funded by this measure. You got drug treatment, peer support and recovery services, transitional and permanent housing for people, and harm reduction interventions, including but not limited to overdose prevention education, access to naloxone, sterile syringes, and specific drug education and outreach. And one of my co-chief petitioners is Haven Wheelock, who works at Outside In, who's doing heroic work in downtown Portland, helping save people's lives, and really just like a harm reduction, just like guru and just angel, in my opinion. And so, yeah, harm reduction will be funded by this measure, and I think that this measure will go a long way with educating legislators, policymakers, and the public about the need to implement more harm reduction interventions, as well as treatment recovery, job training, and housing services that we desperately need.
I think you should run for office.
One day, these campaigns are a lot of work, and each time I work on a campaign, my wife puts a limit on my political activity. But maybe one day.
That was a nice segue into my question for you. Thank you so much for your work. What you're doing really moves the needle, and I know it's a great thing to be able to do that. And it'll affect thousands of people's lives for a long time. So looking out past November, do you have a sense of what you're going to work on next?
So hopefully we win this, and
Of
I
course.
will be working at the legislature to pass expungement and other provisions. And depending on my time constraints around that, I really personally want to start looking and examining into further police reform around police brutality and accountability is a big issue for me. But further improving our criminal penalties and expungement provisions, top of the list, but definitely I want to look in and about accountability and oversight of police in Oregon and Portland in general is definitely on my agenda.
That's really well chosen. Thank you.
Yeah, so this measure will reallocate, millions of dollars that would go to law enforcement that will instead go to social workers and drug treatment providers. And so while law enforcement will be writing tickets under Measure 110, they will no longer be arresting and jailing people. And in addition to the reallocation of the funding to drug treatment recoveries, programs, we're also going to capture the revenue that's saved from not arresting and jailing and 9,000 Oregonians. So this measure does not defund police, but it definitely reallocates tax revenue to other services that I think, and I think even a lot of police agree. And we have former police that endorsed our measure, and I think even a lot of police agree that dealing with homeless population that are addicted and dealing with addiction in general is not the role of police. That's the role of healthcare professionals. And this measure definitely reallocates funds to put us on the path towards that. Yeah. So under Measure 110, there'll be written a ticket, and then on that ticket is going to have the treatment and recovery services available to them, where they can get a health assessment to pay the fine, or if somebody has resources, if they want to just pay the fine, not do the health assessment, they can. But at least now you're no longer going to be handcuffed and taken to jail, and the low level possession will no longer be a usual like criminal probation violation. Yeah, we mandate that the civil infraction by itself will not lead to further criminal punishment. Now, some judges can impose restrictions on people that you can't use drugs. For instance, there are some people that have restrictions that they can't drink alcohol, and alcohol is legal. So there are restrictions that certain judges can put on people, but as a default, these civil infractions shall not lead to further punishment. And then additionally, they cannot be used on their own to deny somebody a license for their job. So say somebody is a licensed lawyer, if you're using drugs and that drug use is preventing you from ethically or adequately doing your job, you could lose your license for that. But just having the civil infraction will not cause you to lose your license. Right now, there are certain licenses that having any drug conviction will cause you to lose that license. And this really part of destigmatizing and not treating, drug addiction as a criminal issue goes along with not punishing people severely and not imposing jail time and probation violations for the low level civil infractions. Mhm. Correct.
I guess just sort of like a hypothetical question for the future for where the direction of further decriminalization or even legalization might go. Um, I don't know. Do you think that all drugs could see this like a similar delegalization or legalization, that is a process that, for example, cannabis has seen, whereby these could be distributed from a regulated supply by either by a free market or by a state run pharmacy or what have you. um because as you said, it seems that going forward we'll have to sort of reevaluate the actual potential harm and dangers that these substances actually pose to people, and adjust that the law is according to that. Do you believe that most of these substances could exist in a free market if given proper education surrounding them and support, or do you think there are some substances which really should be considered too dangerous, and that there should be some sort of gatekeeping involved when it comes to access?
Yeah, I don't see, I definitely don't see all drugs being legalized, and I don't see this, I see this measure leading to expungement and treating drug use as a health issue. But it's hard for me to envision legalization of all drugs. Is my personal opinion.
Anthony, this sounds like it's going to create a lot of jobs in social services and healthcare around addiction. Is that true? And also, how long will it take to implement this if it passes? And will there be enough services for people that are needing treatment to get treatment?
Very good question. So on February 1st, that's when the reduction in criminal penalties goes into effect. My hope actually is, so that'll happen. And then, it's possible certain prosecutors, like they did with cannabis, will start treating the law as it's already been into effect sooner than that. But by under law, February 1st, it'll be the criminal penalties go into effect. And then there will be a hotline established that allows people to call the hotline so they can go undergo the health assessment, get directed to treatment services, and then have the fine waived. We mandate by October 1st of next year is when the Oversight and Accountability Council must start dispersing the funds from the marijuana tax revenue. Now they can disperse the funds sooner. So, but with $100 million more being spent in drug treatment and recovery services and the transitional housing, you can expect that jobs will be created in those fields. And then I think we will find that over time, there's going to be efforts to generate more revenue because because the need is so great. So we know that Measure 110 will help thousands of people, and it'll be a plus for the state, and it's going to save and improve lives. But I think that there will be more work to be done to ensure that we have fully, treatment and recovery services on demand. So we're not promising that we're going to solve everything, just that we're a step in the right direction, and we are indeed going to save and improve lives, and set us forward to even do more good in the future with future reforms.
So the way that Measure 110 will change the landscape in Oregon, how does that compare to what's been done in Portugal?
Yeah, it's very similar to what's done in Portugal. In Portugal, they set in place a system where you get directed to services instead of jail, and so it's very simple, and it's very similar. And so and Portugal convened addiction experts. We're going to have addiction experts, and we're going to be able to adapt it over time to do what works best for Oregon. Yeah, it's going to be a very similar process of what they had in Portugal, and I think we'll see a similar success as far as overdose rates, infections, and drug use rates over time.
Do you know whether in Portugal they decriminalize only small amounts of these drugs, or do they still have dealer penalties?
Yeah, Portugal it's a similar issue where they decriminalize the personal amounts, but it's still a criminal offense to. Yeah, Portugal it's a similar issue.
Is that true in Switzerland too?
I believe so. Yeah, I don't believe any place has eliminated criminal penalties for like unregulated sales. So as far as I know, the only other than of course alcohol, tobacco is cannabis in certain places where it's legal. But I do not believe any place in Europe that has decriminalized has decriminalized sales as well.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you. This is very informative. It's always good to get into the nuance of these issues, I think, especially when, those voter pamphlets can be quite jargony. So as people talk about these in the coming weeks leading up to election, we can speak a little bit more intelligently about the issue if people have questions or don't fully understand it. Because I know there's a lot of confusion between this one and Measure 109 and some other ones that kind of blur the lines. So it's good to have a more clear distinction. So thank you for taking the time to share all your knowledge.
Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
You were going to tell us how to do volunteers, to sign up for volunteers?
Yeah, if you check out the chat, there's a couple of links, but you can just go to vote yes on 110.org, and I've got a volunteer button in the top right hand side. And then I also have a link for this Saturday. We're launching a text bank, which is personally my favorite way to reach out to voters in this day and age. You can see that link there as well. And I think that if Oregon plays out like the rest of the country has shown, there's going to be very strong turnout, and a lot of people are going to vote early. And so helping as early as possible to get out the vote, I think is going to be very beneficial for this campaign and others. So yeah, I encourage you to go to vote yes on 110.org, sign up to volunteer, and participate in a phone bank or text bank. It's actually a lot of fun to talk to voters, and we start off by talking to people who've signed our petition. We talk to young people, especially who have the kind of most to gain in this election in this field, and it's actually really fun to talk to ordinary voters and talk to them about something that's going to really improve a lot of lives and save lives.
I appreciate your focus on that this is about human beings and that human end of things, that this is really what it's all about. And I really appreciate you keep on bringing it around to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, addiction has touched my life, my family's life, and I've people seeing people arrested and have their life upended, their freedom taken away, job opportunities taken away, their housing taken away for really no reason, is heartbreaking to me. And I just truly believe that we can have a better policy in place to invest in people instead of wasting our money on a failed and harmful war that has a war that we're waging on our own nonviolent citizens. And every dollar that we're spending on jails and prison, we're not spending on schools and social workers and the programs that are really needed to reduce crime and poverty in our society.
I just want to say thanks again, Anthony. I really appreciate your time, and I applaud your efforts. This is just huge, and I'm very appreciative.
Thank you for those words. Appreciate it. Yeah, I was like, I did it. I answered all the questions. I appreciate your work. I appreciate educating people around the benefits of the particularly the medicinal spiritual elements of psychedelics, and I think that the time has come for Oregon to roll back these harmful drug war policies and really. Oregon has led the way. We were the first state to decriminalize cannabis in 1973. We helped lead the way with medical and legalization. We've led the way on mail-in ballots. We've led the way on bottle deposit, Death with Dignity Act, and many realms. Oregon is truly, a pioneer. And we're going to do this because this is what's best for Oregon. But we're also going to show the rest of the country that you don't have to arrest and jail people. You can invest in people instead of prisons. And so I really appreciate the time, everybody's work. I've included my Twitter handle in the feed. If you need to find me, Anthony J 1977. You Google that. I come up on Facebook, and that's my Gmail address as well, and Twitter and all that. I'm talking drug policy all the time. That's right. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. You all take care.
So I'm just curious.